The moment the statement appeared, it spread across Washington faster than anyone expected. Within minutes, legal analysts, political commentators, and former prosecutors were already dissecting every word. What had seemed like a routine media appearance had suddenly turned into something far bigger. A single remark from Pam Bondi had ignited a legal and political conversation that quickly reached the highest levels of American public life. And at the center of that debate, once again, was Donald Trump. For years, Trump's legal battles have shaped much of the national conversation in the United States. Investigations, court filings, testimony, and political reactions have all become part of a long and complicated narrative that continues to evolve. But what made Bondi's latest statement so explosive was not just what she said, it was the timing, the context, and the legal implications that many experts immediately recognized. The remark came during a discussion about the ongoing legal scrutiny surrounding Trump's actions during his presidency and afterward. Bondi, who had served as Florida's Attorney General for 2 terms and had long been one of Trump's prominent political allies, spoke with confidence about what she described as the broader legal framework surrounding the investigations. Her words were firm, deliberate, and clearly intended to challenge the interpretation that many prosecutors had put forward. Almost immediately, her statement triggered a wave of reactions across legal circles. Some attorneys argued that Bondi was raising legitimate constitutional questions, issues that have long been debated in American legal theory. Others insisted that her interpretation oversimplified the complex legal standards involved in prosecuting a former president. But no matter which side analysts took, one thing became clear very quickly. Her statement had reopened one of the most controversial questions in modern American law: how far the legal system can go when dealing with a former president of the United States. The debate is not just about Trump as an individual. It touches something deeper within the American constitutional system. Since the founding of the United States, the presidency has always carried a unique position within the structure of government. Presidents possess enormous authority while in office, but the law also insists that no one is above accountability. Balancing those two principles has always been difficult. Bondi's remarks seem to challenge how that balance is currently being interpreted. During her comments, she suggested that some legal actions against Trump could raise serious constitutional concerns about presidential authority and political motivation. She emphasized that legal standards must remain consistent regardless of political pressure, arguing that prosecutors must carefully consider how their actions might affect the long-term stability of American institutions. Supporters of Trump quickly amplified her argument. Many of them have long believed that the investigations surrounding Trump represent an unprecedented use of legal power against a political figure. To them, Bondi's statement reinforced a broader narrative that the legal system must guard against becoming entangled in partisan conflict, but critics immediately pushed back. Legal scholars and former federal prosecutors pointed out that the American legal system has mechanisms specifically designed to investigate potential wrongdoing, regardless of the position once held by the individual involved. They argued that applying different standards to former presidents could undermine the very principle that the rule of law must apply equally to everyone. Within hours, television networks and legal podcasts were filled with detailed discussions about Bondi's interpretation. Some experts began revisiting earlier court precedents, examining how the Constitution has been interpreted when dealing with presidential authority. Others looked at the long historical tradition of accountability within American democracy, because while Trump's legal situation is unique in modern American politics, the broader constitutional questions it raises have existed for generations. One key issue quickly emerged as the center of the debate: whether certain presidential actions taken while in office can later become the basis for criminal prosecution. Some legal theorists argue that allowing such prosecutions could create dangerous precedents, potentially exposing future presidents to politically motivated legal challenges after leaving office. Others insist that failing to allow accountability would effectively place presidents above the law. Bondi's comments seem to land squarely in the middle of this unresolved tension. Her supporters said she was defending constitutional protections. Her critics said she was attempting to shield a political ally. Either way, the statement had done something remarkable. It had forced the legal community to confront a question that many had hoped the courts alone would eventually settle. And in Washington, where politics and law are rarely separate for long, that question was already beginning to echo through the corridors of power. Members of Congress were asked about Bondi's comments during interviews. Legal advocacy groups began publishing responses. Even some former judges weighed in, offering careful interpretations of the constitutional issues involved. But perhaps the most interesting reaction came from within the broader legal profession itself. Behind the public arguments and televised debates, attorneys quietly acknowledged something important. Bondi's remarks had reopened a conversation that goes far beyond any single case or investigation. It was a conversation about the limits of power, the meaning of accountability, and the fragile balance between law and politics in the world's most powerful democracy. And as that conversation grew louder, one reality became impossible to ignore. What had started as a single statement from a former state attorney general was rapidly evolving into something much larger. A legal debate that could shape not only the future of one former president, but also the boundaries of presidential power for generations to come. As the hours passed after the statement, the conversation surrounding Pam Bondi did not slow down. If anything, it intensified. Legal scholars began writing detailed analyses. Television networks scheduled emergency panel discussions, and political figures across the United States found themselves being asked the same question repeatedly. Had Bondi just introduced a serious constitutional argument into the ongoing legal battles surrounding Donald Trump, or was it simply a political defense dressed in legal language? To understand why her comments resonated so strongly, many analysts began revisiting the long and complex history of presidential accountability in the United States. The Constitution never fully anticipated the legal situations modern presidents might face after leaving office. While it outlines impeachment as a mechanism for removing a sitting president, it offers far less clarity about what happens once a president becomes a private citizen again. That gray area has now become one of the most fiercely debated legal questions in modern American politics. Bondi's remarks appeared to focus on the interpretation of presidential authority and the potential consequences of prosecuting former presidents for actions connected to their time in office. She argued that legal actions must be approached with extreme caution, suggesting that the country must consider the precedent such prosecutions could create for future administrations. To some observers, that argument raised legitimate institutional concerns. Former high-level officials often worry that the justice system could become a battlefield for political rivalries if the lines between policy decisions and criminal actions become blurred. According to this view, every future president might govern under the shadow of potential prosecution by political opponents once their term ends, but other legal experts immediately challenged that interpretation. Several former federal prosecutors noted that the American legal system already contains safeguards designed to prevent politically motivated prosecutions. Grand juries, judicial review, evidentiary standards, and appeals processes all serve as checks to ensure that criminal cases are based on law and evidence rather than politics. For them, Bondi's statement raised a troubling possibility that invoking constitutional concerns could be used as a strategy to discourage legitimate investigations. The legal debate soon moved into a deeper territory that goes beyond partisan arguments. At its core, the issue revolves around a fundamental principle of democratic governance. Whether holding the highest office in the country grants any form of lasting legal protection after leaving power. Supporters of strong presidential immunity argue that the office itself requires extraordinary authority to function effectively. Presidents must make difficult decisions involving national security, foreign policy, and executive power. If every decision could later become the subject of criminal litigation, they argue, future presidents might hesitate to act decisively during moments of crisis. Critics of that idea, however, warn that too much protection could create a dangerous imbalance. They point to the founding principle embedded in American democracy that no individual, regardless of rank or influence, stands above the rule of law. If former presidents were shielded from prosecution simply because of their position, critics argue it could undermine the very accountability that democratic institutions rely on. In the days following Bondi's remarks, legal commentators began comparing the current debate with past historical moments. The most frequently mentioned example involved the aftermath of the presidency of Richard Nixon. After the Watergate scandal forced Nixon to resign in 1974, the country faced a similar constitutional dilemma. Prosecuting a former president would have been unprecedented and politically explosive. Ultimately, Nixon received a full pardon from his successor, a decision that prevented a lengthy legal battle but also sparked a national conversation about accountability that continues to echo today. Many analysts now see echoes of that historical moment in the current debate surrounding Trump, but there are key differences as well. Unlike the Nixon era, today's political environment is deeply polarized. Public trust in institutions has become more fragile, and legal decisions often carry enormous political consequences. In this environment, every legal argument, including those raised by Bondi, can quickly become part of a much larger political narrative. Within conservative political circles, Bondi's statement was widely praised. Supporters argued that she had articulated concerns many Americans already share about the potential politicization of the justice system. They framed her remarks as a defense of constitutional stability and warned that legal actions against former presidents could trigger cycles of retaliation between future administrations. Meanwhile, critics on the other side of the political spectrum accused her of attempting to reshape public perception of the legal process. Some argued that raising constitutional alarms could distract from the factual evidence being examined in court proceedings. Despite the intense disagreement, one surprising development emerged from the debate. Several constitutional scholars who normally disagree on political matters acknowledged that Bondi had touched on a genuinely complex legal issue, one that the courts may ultimately have to clarify. Because while political arguments dominate the headlines, the real decision about presidential accountability will not be made in television studios or campaign speeches. It will be made in courtrooms. Judges will examine legal arguments, constitutional text, historical precedent, and the specific facts of the cases involved. Their rulings could shape how future generations interpret the boundaries of executive power. And that is precisely why Bondi's remarks attracted so much attention. In Washington, experienced legal observers recognized something important about the moment. When debates about constitutional authority begin spreading beyond court filings and into public discourse, they often signal that the legal system is approaching a defining test. The United States has faced such tests before, moments when the law must adapt to situations the founders never fully imagined. Now, with Trump's legal challenges continuing to unfold and voices like Bondi raising new arguments about constitutional limits, the country may once again be approaching one of those moments, a moment when the outcome of a legal debate could influence not just a single case, but the future boundaries of presidential power in America. As the legal debate continued to unfold, the ripple effects of the statement made by Pam Bondi were no longer confined to television panels or legal journals. The discussion had now spread into the political arena itself, where lawmakers, policy advisors, and constitutional experts were beginning to recognize that the controversy surrounding Donald Trump was evolving into something larger than a single legal case. Inside Washington, conversations were taking place quietly in congressional offices and legal institutions about what this debate might mean for the future structure of presidential authority. While the immediate focus remained on Trump's ongoing legal challenges, many experts understood that the broader implications could extend far beyond the current political moment. Bondi's statement had essentially reopened one of the most sensitive constitutional questions in the American system: where exactly the line exists between executive power and personal legal accountability. For decades, that line has been tested in different ways. The presidency holds immense authority over national decisions, ranging from military operations to international diplomacy and federal enforcement policies. But the American legal system was designed with a core assumption that every citizen, regardless of power or position, remains subject to the rule of law. When those two principles collide, the results can become legally and politically explosive. Legal scholars began analyzing Bondi's remarks through the lens of constitutional interpretation. Some pointed out that debates about presidential immunity have existed for generations, even if they rarely reach the courts in such dramatic circumstances. One group of constitutional theorists argued that certain presidential actions must remain protected from later prosecution if they were part of official duties. According to this interpretation, a president acting within the scope of executive authority should not face criminal liability for decisions made during the exercise of that power. Their concern centers on the possibility that political opponents could weaponize the legal system after a president leaves office. If former presidents fear prosecution every time political control changes in Washington, some scholars warn it could weaken the ability of the executive branch to function decisively. However, another group of legal experts offered a very different perspective. They argue that while presidents do possess broad authority during their time in office, that authority does not extend to permanent immunity from the law. Under this view, once a president leaves office, any actions that violated criminal statutes can still be examined through the judicial process like those of any other citizen. For these scholars, maintaining accountability is essential for protecting democratic institutions. If the presidency carried long-term legal immunity, critics argue it could encourage abuses of power that might never face meaningful consequences. Bondi's remarks appeared to lean toward the first interpretation, emphasizing caution about how the legal system treats former presidents. But what made the debate particularly intense was the fact that Trump's legal situation is unfolding in a highly polarized political climate. Every legal argument now carries political weight. Across the country, media coverage of the issue expanded rapidly. News organizations began revisiting Trump's broader legal landscape, which includes several high-profile investigations and cases connected to events during and after his presidency. Each of those cases involves complex legal questions that courts will ultimately need to decide. But as Bondi's statement circulated, it added a new dimension to the discussion, the constitutional boundaries that could determine how far those cases might go. Some legal analysts suggested that Trump's legal team could potentially incorporate arguments similar to Bondi's into broader defense strategies. If courts were persuaded that certain actions fell within protected presidential authority, it could reshape how specific allegations are interpreted under the law. Others warned that such arguments might face serious challenges in court. American jurisprudence has historically maintained a strong commitment to the principle that no individual is permanently shielded from legal accountability. Courts have repeatedly emphasized that constitutional protections must coexist with the rule of law. Still, even critics of Bondi's interpretation acknowledge something significant. The courts have never been forced to resolve these questions under circumstances quite like the present moment, and that uncertainty is what has made the debate so intense. For many Americans watching the controversy unfold, the discussion may appear to revolve around a single political figure, but constitutional scholars stress that the stakes reach far beyond any one person or administration. At its heart, the debate is about how democratic systems handle power after it leaves office. Throughout history, countries have struggled with this issue. Some systems grant former leaders extensive immunity in order to preserve political stability. Others pursue aggressive legal accountability that sometimes fuels cycles of political retaliation. The United States has long tried to strike a balance between those two extremes. Now, with Trump's legal battles continuing and voices like Bondi raising questions about constitutional limits, the American system is being asked to clarify that balance once again. Inside courtrooms, judges continue to review evidence, hear arguments, and weigh constitutional principles that were written more than 2 centuries ago. Outside those courtrooms, the public conversation grows louder, shaped by political loyalties, legal interpretations, and the intense spotlight of national media. But beneath all the arguments and commentary lies a deeper reality that many legal observers quietly acknowledge. Moments like this rarely produce simple answers. Instead, they often force a country to confront difficult questions about power, law, and the responsibilities that come with holding the highest office in the nation. And as the debate sparked by Bondi's statement continues to spread across legal and political circles, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The final resolution of these questions will not only determine the future of Trump's legal challenges, it may also define how the United States understands presidential accountability for generations to come.